Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. As the world gears up for the Special Olympics in Berlin, are the Games just as much about social change as they are about sports? Let's get to the bottom line. What started as a tiny event in Chicago more than 50 years ago has ballooned into one of international sport's biggest events. The Special Olympics were made to include all people equally, regardless of ability and disability. This year, they're being hosted by Germany, with about 7,000 athletes from 190 countries pouring into Berlin as we speak. But of course, the Games are about something much bigger than sports. So what's the connection between the Special Olympics and social change around the world? Today, we're talking with German Ambassador to the United States, Emily Haber, and the chairman of Special Olympics, Tim Shriver. Tim, let me just say thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Your mom and dad, you come from, I'm just going to put it out there, the Kennedy clan. You know, your father and mother were very key to launching Special Olympics. I'd love you to share with our audience that may have heard about Special Olympics, but what was the founding origin story of Special Olympics, and what does it mean today to those nations that host it?
Well, I think the original story here is a story that is common to many families. My mom grew up with a sister who had an intellectual challenge. She saw her parents struggle. She saw her sister struggle. She saw the absence of care, compassion, opportunity, justice. And it made her in parts deeply compassionate toward her sister and in parts angry towards the culture. It was as though the world was set up to deny her sister her dignity and her humanity. And she set out on her life to change that, not to change her sister, but to change the systems that surrounded her sister. So sport for us and for her was really a way to engage people in healing and bridging the gap of misunderstanding and fear and discrimination. People like my Aunt Rosemary, there are probably 350 million people on Earth today who have an intellectual disability, not a physical disability, but an intellectual disability. Those people are routinely misunderstood. They're routinely treated, Steve, even today, as though they matter less. Their parents are routinely rejected from schools, from healthcare institutions, from community living, from faith-based institutions, from employment, routinely, as though it were normal or acceptable to do so. The Special Olympics movement uses the power of sports, but it's more than just a game. It's a challenge to cultures, to communities, to individuals to change your mind, to come over to the vision of each of us having gifts and qualities that are optimized when everybody's is welcome.
You know, one of the things in my many conversations with you about this is the bottom line dimension of schools, of communities, of nations that somehow get to that point where they create a culture of inclusiveness, they take with people with disabilities, they build in opportunities for them, and they change.
Right.
And if you compare them to the places that are not open to that, tell us about those differences between those who make the step with inclusion of people with disabilities and those that don't.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's interesting to note that 185 countries signed the convention, ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. That's hard news. When it was passed, it was a very historic occasion. The United Nations came together, and country after country ratified the convention. But what so often happens is that countries want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do next to implement, to actually create action. So even though we have 185 countries that have ratified the convention, a very small fraction of countries have actually put resources into training teachers, into opening schoolhouse doors, into making healthcare accessible. For us, the message is, when you open the door, things get better for everybody. It's not just better for a child with Down syndrome, or a child with autism, or a young adult with Williams syndrome, or any other condition. It's not just better for them when cultures are inclusive. It's better for everybody. It's better for their families. It's better for the neighborhoods. It's better for employers when people see and feel included. We even have a strong inkling that GDP rises as cultures become more inclusive. Can't prove it, but it seems intuitively right, you know? Think about it. When you marginalize a lot of people, add a huge amount of government cost to institutionalization and marginalization, the alternative is putting people in the workforce, welcoming people into community living, having cultures that welcome and support through civic organizations and private philanthropy the needs of every family. It's almost obvious that it makes better sense economically, better sense politically, and certainly from a human point of view.
You know, Ambassador Haber, you've got 7,000 Special Olympics athletes, and those who love them converging on Berlin, coming in a whole array of Olympic sports across so many different fields. I've watched it. I'm always amazed by the experience and seeing the challenge, the joy, the defeats, all of that. But why did Germany want this?
Well, it's true. It's the biggest multi-sports event since 1972. It will be huge. 7,000 athletes, but think of all the volunteers. Think about the host program. That's not only going to happen in Berlin. It's happening in over 170 communities, districts across Germany. So what these games will be about that's not only competition in sports. Events tell stories. It's just like books tell stories.
So it's a hook.
Yeah.
So what happens around the hook? That's interesting.
Well, what happens around the hook is Timothy Shriver so compellingly talked about the data and made a passionate plea on how societies can change if the story really gets roots. And the story we want to tell is a story that is very inclusive, that makes it clear that, yeah, we're different. People have different capabilities, different challenges, but we're all part of the humanity. And I think the inclusion, the fact that athletes with challenges and athletes without challenges are going to compete in sports, are going to enjoy the competition. But mostly what it's going to tell is it's going to tear down, we hope, these invisible obstacles that prevent inclusion. It's going to, we hope, destroy the invisible barriers. We hope it's going to destroy patterns and habits of perception which may create barriers between people with disabilities and without disabilities. So we hope it's going to be a game changer. And by the way, not only for our own society, it's important for our own society too, but these are games that will include 185 countries. It's going to tell stories to these, not only to these, but certainly to these 185 stories. So the magnifying effect of the story that will emanate, we hope, from Berlin will have global repercussions.
How, when you talk about those invisible barriers and your government's there, how much of a lift is removing those barriers, and do you have confidence the Special Olympics will move you far forward?
Oh yes, I do. Look, we don't start at zero. There is legislation in place to facilitate people coming into jobs, people with disabilities coming into jobs. Actually, those not in jobs are at an all-time low. There's legislation for special health care, there's legislation for special care. But legislation alone will not alter behavior. Legislation alone will not alter attitudes or perceptions. They exist. And the only way to attack these perceptions, to actually to show that they don't belong in our time and age. They never did, actually. But the only way to really destroy them, to pulverize them, is to tell a story where actually everyone can see with his or her own eyes that we belong together. We're all part of the project of humanity, if you will. And that's the story that needs to come from the Special Olympics, because it will speak to the human heart.
Tim, I'm interested in how the brand has evolved over the decades. I mean, it's a very well-known brand. I am stunned by my own introduction today that 190 countries are participating in this. Barely knew that there were 190 countries. So to have that kind of awareness, but I'm sure that Special Olympics has a certain kind of self-selected crowd of people who know about it. But how are you, what are the barriers to your brand going into communities that may not know it? Are you well known in Germany? Are you well known in the Middle East? Are you well known in Latin America? What is the global state of the Special Olympics brand?
At the first event you mentioned, my mom in 1968, a very tumultuous.
This one in Chicago?
In Chicago, the first time the word Special and Olympics came together. It was in Chicago in Soldier Field, and my mom spoke at the opening ceremonies. And she looked down on that field. Almost everybody had come from an institution. Almost everybody was orphaned, no families, volunteers. 1968, before the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which would lead to violence a few weeks later, after the terrible losses of Dr. King and my uncle Bobby Kennedy, there was a moment of great tension and fear and loss of hope in the country. And she said at that event, I hope someday there'll be 1 million athletes that will join you that are on the field. Today, Steve, there are 6 million Special Olympics athletes. In a pre-COVID year, those athletes would be competing in over 100,000 games at the community level every year. 100,000, all run by volunteers.
Wow.
Now, you know, there's so much, you mentioned this is political. I'll tell you what most politicians will tell us. The world is divided, we're in conflict, tension, fear, division, all this stuff. This event is a powerful counter message. It's saying, come see the best of the human spirit. It's not something you have to hope and dream exists. It exists. Come watch heroes of tolerance and openness. You don't have to wonder whether that's possible. Come look at the athletes. They're doing it every day. They get their fingers pointed at them, and yet they're out there ready to run again. And if you don't believe that governments can take positive action, come listen. In just a few hours from now, we're going to be launching a Special Olympics global coalition of the governments of the willing who are pledging to opening their schools to social inclusion. We hope we'll have 10 or 15. We've already kind of teased that China will join this coalition, and we hope many others. Here's the point: governments are looking for a way in.
Interesting.
Governments are looking for opportunities to create the counter message. We as citizens, Ambassador Haber has mentioned this, it's not just about governments. We need governments to help and lead, but citizens are ready. I mean, my mother in a time of great despair offered a message of hope. We now live in a time when many, many people, I'm sorry to say, are giving up. In many countries, they're despairing of the future. They're despairing of their fellow citizens. In Berlin, of all places, we will see the exact opposite message. Not only don't give up, join us.
I think it's, if someone were watching this show to say, it's easy for America, it's easy for Germany, you're rich nations. It's not easy for Pakistan, rural Pakistan, a young girl with intellectual disabilities who's just completely disconnected, loved by her mother and grandmother, but virtually no one else, chained up, limited in where she can do. You know, we saw a film together showing the life of several young people in rural, I think it was rural Pakistan, and it was horrific. And then how the volunteers and others with Special Olympics brought this young girl out of her shell, turned her into a runner. She became a winner, you know, very fast.
Steve, listen, all you have to do is talk to our moms and dads. It's tough everywhere. But that young woman who was in a chain,
she was chained
is
up.
in Berlin right now. And she's preparing to run, representing her country, with the best runners from around the world who are like her. And she will run, I don't know what she'll finish, but I tell you one thing, she will make the world proud. That someone saw her, her mom, you're right, her grandmother, others didn't, but volunteers saw her, and people of goodwill saw her and said, we're going to change this. Here's the point. Change is possible. Yeah, things are tough. Things are tough. Imagine in this country, again, let's go to 1968. 200,000 Americans were incarcerated in institutions in 1968 when the games were held in Chicago at an empty Soldier Field. So people could have said, look, this is a joke. You have no shot here. People are in institutions. The walls are 14 feet high. They're surrounded by barbed wire. Parents are giving up all. You know, some people look at that and go, well, it's hopeless. Other people look at that and go, what do we do? How do we get involved? How do we make the change? How do we join? And the world right now is starving for opportunities for people to say, let me give this something a chance. Is there something I can believe in? And the answer is yes. Believe in these athletes. Watch what they do.
Ambassador, today we have a major crisis that seems like the old-style crisis of a nation invaded not by the Soviets but by Russia, into Ukraine, bordering and part of Eastern Europe. To what degree do you think, again, coming back to global politics, do you think there will be messages about inclusion, about tolerance, about nationhood, et cetera, values that we care about coming from the Special Olympics that are essentially also a comment about Ukraine?
Well, it's the maximum counter story that is going to emanate from Berlin. The story of the Russian invasion, the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a story of hate, of imperial entitlement, and of brutal power. Certainly not anything that comes close to inclusion, open societies, and respect and actually celebration of diversity. That's what we want the world to see in the World Games in Berlin.
We're going to talk during this show as well to Jojo Woodland. I think there are going to be vignettes sewn through this, Tim. I'm just interested in, the experiences you have had running this, and I know how committed you are, and also your frustration actually in trying to connect all of us to these wonderful athletes. Can you share with us any stories about some of the athletes you've known and worked with?
I just went about 2 weeks ago to a school here in suburban Maryland where they were having their challenge day. Athletes with very, very, very significant challenges. Most nonverbal, most struggling with mobility issues. And they had their celebration of sports. Simple activities. Parents cheering, law enforcement, men and women saluting the flags that came in, music playing as the procession went into the gym at this local school. I looked around and it was almost brought tears to my eyes. The heroism of these teachers who are there every day, managing the most complex medical conditions with smiles on their faces a mile wide. And the parents so proud that their child has been able to lift the ball or move it a few inches. The principal, radiant, walking around the halls with a smile on his face as though he just won the lottery, so to speak. There's a part of us, Steve, that is revealed in these games that I find endlessly moving. It challenges me to be a better person, honestly. It challenges me to see more clearly the beauty of the human spirit. Because sometimes we all get distracted and we start to see people as good and bad or smart and not so smart or desirable and undesirable. And then you come to I was at that Special Olympics event just, as I say, a few weeks ago. And I got in my car and I had to take a deep breath and I thought to myself, I got work to do. Those people, they know how to live. I want to learn more from them. That's the message of our movement. It always has been. It's an invitation. You're a country, you want to do better, join us. You're a family, you want to try something new, join us. You're a person who maybe isn't the best athlete on the team, come play with us. We got a spot for you. You have a disability, you don't have a disability, we have unified sports. You want to join as a nation, let's find the things that really speak to the core spirit that we share and build on them. It's not going to solve every problem. It's not going to solve every military, economic. Ambassador Haber and others are going to still have to manage geopolitical challenges. They'll persist. But this kind of work will make it more likely we'll find peaceful solutions. I feel like I say sometimes, Steve, I have a front row seat for the best in humanity. Many of these volunteers are paying out of their own pocket for the materials and the equipment and renting the gym and driving the cars. And I just think to myself, I hear in the back of my mind Louis Armstrong playing What a Wonderful World, There's something to be said for being sober and being realistic about the difficulties in the world. I'm not naive. We got to fight hard. Most of our parents live day to day, struggling for anybody to pay attention and listen. My mom used to tell this story. She said, I can remember my mother, she's talking about my grandmother, putting down the phone over and over again. She'd call looking for something, and she'd put the phone down and she'd say, there's nothing for Rosemary, and her voice would trail off. Nothing, nothing, nothing. It's infuriating that that's still the case. but it's mostly infuriating because of the enormous loss of goodness and possibility that that represents when we close doors. So we go to Berlin, we think of 1963, think of all the different parts of the history of that great city, some very, very tragic, some very, very hopeful. But we come to, as Ambassador Haber said, to invite the world to tear down the walls of misunderstanding and fear and replace them with a simple act of dignity for our brothers and sisters. In this case, people with intellectual challenges. But quickly, you learn. As you treat maybe them, maybe you can treat others as well.
That's beautiful. Let me ask you just a final question, Ambassador. I'm really interested in this tension between family or philanthropy and wanting to help those with disabilities and the generosity of that spirit and self-interest, shrewd calculating interest in doing this, the bottom line reasons to pursue this, because I think that once people look at the net benefits for students, for society, for how nations that are going up the development ladder are treated in the world that have this and not, I'm interested in, do you think Germany is absorbing those self-interest lessons in a way where it can become a good coach and mentor to other nations that want to take this on?
I'm not quite sure whether pure self-interest or the recognition of data will be able to tear down walls. It may be an additional driver to take that road, but we will not tear down the road. We will the walls. We will not eliminate the perception patterns, the bias, if we don't make a human story about it. Look, you mentioned the film all of us saw on this young woman and other athletes, now athletes in Pakistan. And what I really deeply felt was not only did the young woman become a winner, become an athlete, became proud of herself, and very self-assured too, but her environment did too.
That's right.
I deeply felt that her mother had loved her, and there were others perhaps too, but they were very shy about it and didn't know what to do. And so they just...
It changed her village.
It changed the village. It changed the society. Just seeing that someone they loved could actually have potential and could live the potential. And that was huge. So that's what we need to do.
Well, we will have to leave it there. What a terrific conversation. Best wishes for a successful event. Thank you so much for being with us today. Ambassador Emily Haber of Germany, the host country of the Special Olympics this week in Berlin, and Tim Shriver, chair of the Special Olympics. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
I had a chance to speak with one of the athletes competing in the Special Olympics this week. He is Joseph Woodland from right here in Washington, D.C., and here's what he had to say about competing in the track and field races next week in Berlin.
It takes a lot to be fit for the sport. And
are you excited?
yes, the first one to make history from Washington, D.C. It's going to be an awesome trip.
Have you traveled overseas before?
No, this will be my first time traveling overseas.
Are you going to win?
Yes, I'm going to win.
He's been training for 10 years for this day. And if hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities around the world show as much grit and confidence as JoJo, that can only be a great thing. And that's the bottom line.